this whole glory business to me is it's all an entertainment act in general, because you can't capture glory unless you're honestly aware of the audience.
Okay.
Right. In order to get this glory thing, so you have to be aware of them. And even a guy that's even a martyr, he doesn't mind dying. Isn't this why a martyr doesn't mind dying if it's in front of a crowd?
That's crazy.
He's brave in front of a crowd, but once he's by himself, he cries and he begs for his life. People want to be God figures, even though we don't say it, we want to be those figures, those dramatic people, maybe in biblical time, maybe in the Quran, maybe just ancient people. That's who we want to be. We want to be people of substance, I believe. The majority of us. We want people to look up to us. We want to be remembered by people. That's the vanity about that we don't like to discuss about us. That's a really ugly part in society, that we want to be something more than we actually are.
Look, like I say, people stop acting like teenagers when they choose to stop acting like teenagers. I live a life that's more meaningful than just riding a bicycle up a mountain or just giving diet advice. My life is not really about my body, and it's not really about other people's bodies that much either. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
what a foreign concept.
Yeah. But in this context of veganism that is hung up on, of course, beauty and weight loss, and I think that's still worth talking about. I think that's worth saying openly. Is not everyone's life is about that, and that's what I'm doing in China right now. This is an essay about the anthropology of Laos, written in Chinese. Was my recent writing assignment. Is this meaningless? Is learning Chinese meaningless and talking about politics and philosophy and history in Chinese? Is it meaningless? Maybe. In a sense, I can even say yes. In a sense, I can say this is a waste of my time. But compared to what, right?
Yeah.
Compared to doing what Durianrider does with his time right now. I think this is a pretty meaningful thing for me to do with my life.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would say that higher learning in general is meaningful, especially compared to the average person and how they live their life. But yeah, just this fascination, I suppose, that a lot of vegans seem to have just with their physical bodies, and they it's beyond them to comprehend that some people just don't really care.
Right.
I myself, we kind of talked about it already, but I myself, I'm just not preoccupied with my physical appearance. I know how to present myself in a certain manner, just as a woman. If I show up to an event and I haven't done my makeup and my hair, it kind of stands out. Right. So I just have a very pragmatic attitude towards my physical appearance, I suppose. I don't derive any value from it, or sense of worth from it. Whereas, so many of these other vegan YouTubers, Freelee, her physique is everything to her. If she were to just, which is, she's getting older, right? She's not going to have that physique forever.
I know.
Or something could happen, right? She could get into, obviously, God forbid, but she could get into a horrific accident and she could lose everything that she's worked so hard for. And just, so this emphasis on the physical, it's so vapid. It's so shallow. And it's just not what I think veganism really needs right now.
Yeah, anyway, there are so many little tragedies in that. But, there's actually a legit saying from the Buddha in the Pali Canon. So this is real Buddhist philosophy, unlike stuff that got made up in Japan or China centuries later, which, it's memorable because it's the exact opposite of how we think about these things today. But there's a statement from the Buddha, and this is approximately translated, of course, but it says basically you're better off believing in the body than believing in the mind or the soul. And it goes on to say, if you believe in the body, and it's this kind of thing you're talking about with, the vanity of Freelee or whatever, at least it may last for 10 years or 20 years. The beauty of your body, the strength of your body, you might get a few decades in there, but the human mind is changing all the time. Your spirit, your emotion. And it's an interesting passage of Buddhist philosophy because it's the exact opposite of what you're expecting it to say, right? And why it says that and so on is worth thinking about. Philosophically, it is interesting. But yeah, for me, Okay, I'll say something about me, but really I want to come back to the issue you raised. For me, I was always kind of planning for my old age. I wanted to be setting the foundation for what I was going to be doing as an old man, whether in terms of languages, scholarship, life of the mind, intellect, but also politics. And now through YouTube, it is wonderful. I really have a second chance to do that. I think long term, exactly, people like you, because you're a Canadian citizen, we may long term, next 10 years, be able to set up a foundation or multiple foundations. We could have one foundation that just does education. We could have something else tackling other issues, etc. You could have something else doing bears or, more wildlife-oriented stuff. But no, long-term, the connections I'm making through YouTube really will give me a foundation to do something meaningful in my old age now, even if it takes decades, which is wonderful. It's a very positive thing. But what I want to come back to, implicit in what you're saying also, is actually not the idea of youth and beauty, but of a second youth. And all these people, including Durianrider, including Freelee, they weren't young when they started this, but they went back to living like teenagers again. You know what I mean? Durianrider, he'd already grown old, going to prison and being a drug addict and his whole story. And then he reclaimed his youth. He reclaimed his vibrancy. And Freelee also, that's how she frames her narrative. So I see a lot of older people also for whom that's extremely seductive. There's one guy, I think he's still a fan of mine. I haven't heard from him in a while, but he's over 50. And he had one video on YouTube where he was just saying honestly, yes, these images of going to the beach really appealed to me. That was part of what drew him into veganism and so on. Yes, this idea that at age 50 he could get back into shape and take off his shirt and not feel ashamed of himself, through veganism and exercise and this lifestyle. That yes, this really powerfully appealed to him, and he has to admit, he was reflecting on it, obviously he was being a bit philosophical about it, that it's not really the cow in the slaughterhouse, but that for him this was really seductive and motivating and powerful. So, a second youth, that's something very different from a first youth. And inevitably, for guys like mumbling and whispering, it also tends to be connected to seducing younger people, to getting into bed with people who are actually, teenagers or in their 20s or what have you. So I'll have to censor that out because that's an unproven application. But as I said, the big controversy with mumbling and whispering, I've simply said there is a sexual component to it. There's a sexual component to this quest to recapture your lost youth. And my attitude is to say to people, you're never going to be young again. And really what you're doing is throwing away the responsibilities of being an adult. And I'm not even that sex negative. If people in their 50s want to have love affairs with people in their 20s, fine. It's legal. It's consenting adults. Knock yourself out. Try not to get on an ego trip about it. Try not to let it ruin either one of your lives. But I'm not really that sex negative. But the ego trip, the second youth, and this business of throwing away your responsibilities where you're not, to me that's sad. And we need, we need teenagers in veganism, but we also need 50-year-olds who actually act like they're 50 years old. We need responsible adults doing all the things politically and otherwise. But whether it's politics or publishing books, doing something positive, doing positive things to build a movement.
Yeah, totally. That's exactly what I was going to say, right? If we have all the mature people reverting back to being a teenager, well then, how's anything going to get done?
No, and I hate to say it, but that's a real question I have to ask my fellow vegans on a face-to-face basis, where I'm asking them to step up and again, long term, be involved in some kind of foundation and some kind of much more pragmatic activism. And again, there were positive surprises out there. We were all surprised when the Light Twins really came forward and they were talking that talk. They really, I think they're looking forward to their middle age. They're still young guys, or they look young. I don't actually know how old they are. They're probably older than they look, but they're wanting to take on the responsibilities of being middle-aged adults, and that's a beautiful thing. It's beautiful in a very different way from teenagers in bikinis. So
Totally.
Okay.
Actually, to get back to way back now, what I was going to say I was going to ask you a quick question about just the vegan scene in British Columbia, because I think I vaguely remember you saying that you were disheartened by it or something. Sure. Because that's just a completely contrasting experience to what I've had here in Southern Ontario, London, Ontario. My city is only about 300,000 or so people, but we've got my university club. There's a lot of students in that club. We've got a separate vegan club just within the city itself, like separate from the university. We have like all vegan restaurants, like an all vegan bakery, and like it's just a very prominent vegan scene. So I guess I kind of just assumed that British Columbia would be similar if Southern Ontario was just like almost so progressive in this way. I just assumed.
Right. Well, you've described the scene, but you haven't described how those people treated you. Like to what extent you were welcome in, or to what extent, I'm not crazy, but I just say so. What? But what was your experience? Have those people been welcoming? Have they been opening doors to you? Have they been cooperating with you, or has it been?
Yeah. Yeah, I find that people here are very like very welcoming. Like there's a couple people I disagree with strongly with how they go about promoting veganism and also who they let into the club, so to speak.
At least they talk to you. At least they talk to you. Well,
yeah. I have. Yeah. Oh man.
Well, no. Look, my answer is no. I'll hear more, but I just say my answer is actually short on this. I mostly mention this in contrast to YouTube and the internet, because a lot of my fellow YouTubers feel like the whole digital thing is so shallow and crass, and people are just trying to make money out of fighting with each other or what have you. But I said no. Look, my experience is the opposite, because people on YouTube at least will really talk to me. They're really interested in cooperating with me, sometimes short term and sometimes long term. And no, my experience with real world activists or non-digital activists who are not on YouTube is completely negative. Where first and foremost, they just refuse to talk to me. No answer to an email. Or refuse to talk to me face to face. Like, on real world, standing in the same room. Total exclusion, total refusal to various forms of hostility, games being played for power, for political control, and what have you. And again, I mean, people are responding to me before they'd seen my YouTube channel. People were just responding to my charisma. Like, if I sit down in a room and we're all talking about politics, I'm pretty good at talking about politics. So do you respond to that as a positive thing and say this guy has a talent we can use? Or do you respond to that as a threat and say this is a guy who could take over the leadership? This is a guy who could be more influential than me? And I wish, logically, you would think that the real world vegans would be more positive towards me as my influence on YouTube grew. And again, it's not really the number of viewers I have, it's the depth of the influence I have on them. Because even back, like let's say, like today I would say there were really 2,000 people who are passionate about my channel, and maybe 5,000 who care about it, a little bit. But like even back when it was just 500 people who cared about it, my channel had a really big impact on those people, and the discussions were meaningful and what have you. So again, if you're a member of a vegan organization in Victoria, or you're, those vegan organizers, they could have responded to me as a talent and an opportunity and so on, or they could respond to me as a threat, or et cetera, et cetera. So there's both more and less to say about that. But like I say, in a sense, it's a really short answer. No, not even from Vancouver, because I tried to get in touch with Direct Action Everywhere and those people in Vancouver. And if even one of them had talked to me, there'd be a video on my YouTube about it. I could have done a Skype conversation with them, Matthew. And there isn't one video on my channel with even one person from Victoria or Vancouver. Not even one. So I had 100% hostility, 0% cooperation, et cetera, et cetera. And, anyway, I could talk about the details of my own situation there. But, we had a kind of weird power struggle for who was going to control the student club at University of Victoria, and there was real dishonesty about that. And this guy who's not a student, so it is actually illegal. It's contrary to the rules.
I had the exact same situation happen actually. It's pretty funny.
Yeah. Okay. No. Well, that's good. So I'm just going to open the floor to you, because I always say, if you have a positive experience, I'm happy for you. If you're part of any kind of organized movement, I'm happy for you. If you know people you can cooperate with, having just 5 people you can cooperate with who live in the same city with you, it can be tremendously positive and important. But if you don't, you got to be honest about that too, right? So that's what I'm into. I'm into admitting the scope of the problem. I don't want to pretend I'm part of a movement when I'm not, right?
Yeah. You I remember you mentioning that quite a bit. Like, if you just had like 5 people or whatever, like a good group of people who could get together and just actually make a positive difference. I'm just sitting there, I would be listening to that, and because like that's exactly what I have here in London. I've got a group of students in this club that we have at my school, and they're super passionate, super reliable, and we get stuff done.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting here. I'm like, here I have a unique opportunity. I don't know the next time I'm going to have this opportunity, right? I'm graduating this year.
Right.
And so
yeah.
I like this year, I'm just really ambitious. Like I want to take it, I guess, to the next level, so to speak. And so when I hear you talk like that, I'm just like, it really amps me up. I just, we have, like, for instance, in September, our first event is, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, or your feelings about Dr. William Tuttle.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, I have my opinion about him. Right. I will say this, he wouldn't have been my first choice, but he's good because he'll bring a lot of people in. He's a big name. But, what are your feelings on Tuttle?
Look, Will Tuttle, everything about him connected to Buddhism is, from my perspective, a scam and makes him a snake oil salesman. The fact that he calls himself a Dharma master, what he says about his background in Buddhism, what he says about Buddhism itself. So because of my background in Buddhism, I regard that aspect of who he is and what he does very negatively. Now, does that mean that he's a bad advocate for veganism? No. Maybe there are also really positive things about him and what he does. But for me, because of my background in Buddhism, my background in Asian studies and everything else, there are just these questions about who he is, about what he's done with his life in Buddhism and in Asia and what have you. And, maybe, if his attitude was that that's all in the past and that's over and doesn't matter, I'd be willing to take that attitude too. But on the contrary, the last time I saw his website, he's still presenting himself as this spiritual figure, as this Dharma master, etc. And to me, that is deeply problematic. Now, already, people say about me that I'm a cult leader, that some people relate to me that way. And no, but all my life, even when I was a teenager, I had problems with that. There were people who really became followers of mine when I was in high school, really my second last year of high school. And I was really wary of this kind of leadership quality and of people responding to it in that way, of people really becoming your follower. So I do have some caution about that. But you can imagine, or perhaps you cannot imagine, what kind of devotion I could be inspiring from people if I had just chosen to put on the self-righteous robe of Buddhists, of not to ask these kinds of provocative and difficult questions, but to tell people what they want to hear and to appeal to a religious and cultural tradition with those kinds of roots. Because I have had conversations with people about philosophy in a Buddhist temple where, from my perspective, I was just talking about philosophy. But there are people standing there listening to me, and they start to regard me as a kind of divinely inspired being, where I'm starting to get that kind of devotion, which is not what I'm trying to get. It's not the response I'm looking for, but I realize I'm having this effect on people, and I've got to say, look, I'm a normal human being, and don't. No, and that's very real. And so I don't know. Will Tuttle, my apprehensions about him are all on that side. I have never read The World Peace Diet. I've never read any of his books. And, you'll get to see his lecture. Maybe he's doing something really positive in the world. Aaron Janis believes he's doing something positive, for veganism and ecology. And, veganism, you've heard me say this, it's such a morally good cause. I believe that Catholics can do something positive for veganism and Muslims can do something positive, even though I'm totally opposed to the Catholic religion and the Muslim religion. For me as an atheist, these are really bad organizations and bad belief systems and bad religions. But as it happens, my background makes me especially skeptical of and wary of people attached to Buddhism in exactly the way he happens to be attached to Buddhism.
Okay. Yeah. I read, I have to read the book since I'm on the exec team of this club and he's coming to speak at my university. But I've read the first few chapters. Right. And I didn't even realize he was a Buddhist, but I did pick up on the Eastern philosophical themes. Right. In it, he's talking about being connected with the universe, and the fact that we're not connected with the universe is causing all the suffering and destruction and whatnot. Right. That being said, the only amount that I've studied Eastern philosophy was a Western philosopher who was inspired by Eastern philosophy, and that has been the extent of my education on that, which is disappointing.
Who are you alluding to? Is it Schopenhauer? Who is it?
I think it was Schopenhauer.
Okay, yeah. He's the main one. He didn't know much about Buddhism, but he was very inspired by the couple of short quotations he read from Buddhist philosophy. Exactly what he read, we know from there's historical evidence of exactly what he read and what he didn't read about Buddhism. Which I have studied. Yeah, but look, think about how different this conversation would be right now, how differently you would think of me if I had taken the same road Will Tuttle took. I've lived in Buddhist monasteries. I've meditated with Buddhist monks. I've studied with some very famous names, both Buddhist professors but also Buddhist monks. And when I came on YouTube, from the start of my time on YouTube, I was open in saying, I've lost my faith. I never believed in supernatural elements of Buddhism, never. But I used to believe in it in the same sense you would believe in the Green Party or veganism. I believed in it as something positive in the world. And I lost that faith. I no longer believe that, in the 21st century, Buddhism is going to do anything positive. And I don't want to be a part of it. I have videos reflecting on that. But imagine how different everything would be, including this conversation you're having with me, if I played any of the games Will Tuttle is playing. If I just made vaguely positive statements about the universe loves you, and and if I kept on that robe, and if I were coming on YouTube and using those as credentials, be like, hey, I studied with Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhikkhu Bodhi is a famous Buddhist monk. Hey, I slept in the same monastery on the top of a mountain in Sri Lanka where Bhikkhu Bodhi used to sleep, and I had these amazing insights and experiences when I was meditating. It would be so easy for me to play that game, and I would get money and sex and a little bit of fame. Not that much fame, but the money and sex are very real. And, you know what? Here's the fourth one we don't talk about that much in veganism. I would get power. Money, sex, fame are a big thing right now in digital veganism, but power is coming next. There isn't yet enough going on for power. But religious authority involves power. In ways, that again you may not be able to imagine, or you may. But like if you hang out in a Buddhist temple, and even if it's just something like where someone walks in the room and all they have to do is make a hand gesture and everyone's silent, there are all kinds of power. There's power controlling people, but controlling money and politics and other things. So look, I'm in a unique position, and I could. I was a real scholar, unlike Will Tuttle. I could actually read the ancient canon and produce quotations and prove things. I could have been a very legitimate and powerful Buddhist monk or Buddhist layperson or what have you in ways that other people can't. Now, if I told you that was ever a temptation for me, I would be lying. That was never a temptation for me. But I'm a very unusual person. And for the vast majority of people, I think that would have been a huge temptation. And I don't know Will. I don't know him. Maybe for him it was a temptation, and maybe it still is. But look, let's keep it real. Who's the competition? Is Will Tuttle a worse guy than Durianrider? I doubt it.
No, true.
So even if there are some of those problems there, maybe I always say different people can contribute in different ways. Really, really quickly, I'll just say, Henya Mania. Mm-hmm. Henny and I know each other. We haven't talked that much. I've never had a long conversation like this with her. But, I basically support Henya doing her thing. Would I ever do what Henya's doing? No. Do I enjoy her videos of her sitting in an airport completely? No. But different people can contribute in different ways. So I am open-minded about that. You know what I mean? Henya has something different to contribute. Sorsha has something different to contribute. Maybe Will Tuttle has something valuable to contribute. Maybe. I'm not going to sit here and damn the guy outright. And, I wish it would be so easy for me to say that about Durianrider too. If Durianrider wasn't such a scumbag, I wish I could just sit here and say to you, Durianrider has something positive to contribute also. But, he's crossed so many lines. It's so negative that, no, I can't even say that about him. But, yeah.
Yeah. Durianrider has crossed. Yeah. He hasn't just crossed that line. He's made leaps and bounds past that line at this point. Yeah. What are your thoughts? Do you think he could redeem himself at this point?
I think he's not going to, But so many of us have spelled out for him exactly what he needed to do to redeem himself. And, when I made that apology video to Freelee, the apology video on my channel where I apologized to Freelee, that gave him such a positive opportunity to turn that situation around. But no, look, YouTube, and you're going to see this, different people are playing different games by different rules. It's not the case that no rules apply. It's just that there's more than one game being played by more than one set of rules, and he and Freelee invented a whole new game. It didn't exist before them. They really invented a whole new game, and they're playing by their rules, and they are doing it to death. And included in that is a very sincere form of paranoia. Jason could still be friends with them to this day if they weren't paranoid. So many people, Vegan Gaines, he wanted to remain friends with Durianrider. But Durianrider's view of the world is so stark, either you're my slave or you're my enemy. So all these people become enemies. It's real paranoia, real sincere paranoia. And ultimately, that's why he didn't have anyone to beat me up. He wanted to have me beaten up. But for me, one of the turning points in that was realizing just how alone he is. He's sitting there bragging as if he has a gang of tough guys to follow his orders. And you stop, for me, one day I stopped and realized he's completely alone. He doesn't have a gang of tough guys. He doesn't even have one tough guy. He's really alone. And even when you see him on the top of that hill, with his fans asking him questions at the top of Doi Sutep, he is alone. And now, at that time, he had already broken up with Freelee. In reality, it was right at that time, whether or not it's a coincidence. He broke up with Freelee right when he was making the threats against me, so far as I understand the situation. So again, he's alienated. He's made enemies out of so many people. He's so incapable of having friends. He didn't have anybody to come around and beat me up. That's why as soon as I just said, okay, where do you want to meet me? He never once invited me to meet him anywhere because he knew I'd come. Didn't even matter if I was going to get my ass kicked. I'd show up. Fine. Fine. Knock some teeth out of him. I'm too pretty anyway. I got too many teeth, Unlike Durianrider, these are my real teeth, by the way. No steroids, no plastic surgery. Unlike Durianrider. But anyway, look, I would show up and I noticed the contrast. So as soon as I said to him, look, where do you want to meet me? Any possibility of meeting me disappeared because, he had nobody. I don't even think it's anything else. I think if he had people to beat me up, that's it. I would have been beaten up. But he switched to threatening Jake Eames, who is like...
No kidding. Right?
Oh, yeah. And Jake, the only difference is Jake is less than 50% of my body mass. He's in really good shape. He does distance running. He's actually quite athletic, but he is small compared to me. And what was I going to say about that? With Jake, when he made the threats to Jake, he was saying things to Jake like, why don't you come, to meet at this event? The Q&A stuff, the mountain stuff. I remember I said to Jake, I said, look, he's using the same threats of violence against you against me. The difference is he's offering you a place to meet. He never did that to me once because he knows I'd come. Mm-hmm. And he's alone. Durianrider is alone. So that's the game he plays. Those are the rules he plays by. And ultimately it's just a tragedy of what happens when you head down that path. His faith in himself is absolute. And at any given time, there are now just a couple of people who share that faith and who really have a slave-like relationship to him. And you see that on his channel. He interviews these few people who are still really devoted to him. And again, look, some people are afraid that I'll be a cult leader. One of my fans, people hate that I use the word fans, but whatever. To me, it's a natural word to use. One of my fans was telling me that his own girlfriend really criticized him because his girlfriend felt that he was becoming too devoted to my channel or whatever, this cult-like relationship. I know, as I say, even as a teenager, I could see the kind of follower relationship you can get in with people. Basically, all you need to tell people, you just tell them what they want to hear, and people develop devotion to you. So, again, I've never been tempted, but it is easy for me to imagine going down Durianrider's path of trying to cultivate, those kinds of fans and followers and what have you, those kinds of relationships, just like we were saying about Will Tuttle. But that is not the game I play. I play a very different game by very different rules, So.
Well, I just think Durianrider's whole story, I think it's just so tragic.
Yeah.
I look at this man and, I mean, yeah, he says outrageous things, he says inappropriate things are completely inexcusable, but, I look at his experiences that he's had that have, led to this moment, right? Like, it couldn't have... Yeah. I don't know. I guess I just don't assume that people are just born bad. Maybe that's overly optimistic of me. I don't know. But, so I look at this man and what he's doing with his life and the things that he continuously chooses to do over and over, despite the repercussions. And I pity him. Yep. He's like twice my age, and I pity him so much.
Totally. And look, I felt that way, especially when I was doing the medical research on him. His paranoid fear of doctors, and refusal to believe in modern medicine, and his crazy claims about curing Crohn's disease. When I was looking into that, you see his childhood experience and how it all fits together. As you say, is this tragic element to it, where it's like, You can see he suffered as a kid. And even now with the steroid use and the tough guy posturing, other people have told me that he never went to jail, that even that's a lie. Like, most people don't brag about going to jail, but people have written to me, again, I don't know what's true, but saying to me, look, it's just not true, he never went to jail, and they know from this or that record in Australia or what have you, that it's either a complete lie or it's a gross exaggeration, that he spent a couple nights in a juvenile detention center, and he calls that doing hard time in prison. But anyway, whether or not that's true, what have you, but his tough guy persona also, you can see, is built on the experience that he himself talks about of being a sickly, weak kid who couldn't get any attention from women. I think he said he lost his virginity at age 22 or something. He gave a specific age, that he was physically sick, unhealthy, weak, that he was never the guy getting into fistfights or dealing with that. And he was never the tough guy from the streets. And now, again, it's a second youth. He's trying to be all those things. He's trying to be everything he wasn't when he was young the first time, And the irony is, I keep saying this, I'm not a tough guy. I'm just tougher than these guys. I'm not a nice guy, but I'm nice to these guys. The ridiculous thing is, anyone who knows, again, I can say anyone who knows me personally, but now nobody knows me personally. Coming back to I was going to say this in relation to what you were saying about university. When you leave university, you're going to lose the vast majority of your contacts and friends when you move, wherever you're moving to. I don't know. We'll talk about that another time. But, I'll be interested to know in the future where you're thinking about living, whether it's Asia temporarily or just another city in Canada or where you're going to hang your hat. But when you leave university, the vast majority of your friends and contacts you'll lose. And the great thing about YouTube is that you are going to make friends and contacts that move with you. And I'm one of them. I want to stay in touch with you. I don't care. You can move to Cambodia. You can move to Alaska, whatever, Obviously, I want to stay in touch with you because of this fundamental vegan thing. The political horizons for veganism in the future. That's the great thing about YouTube. But for me, when I left Cambodia, I lost all the friends I had in Cambodia. When I left Laos, I lost all the friends I had in Laos. When I left Kunming, when I lived here before in the past, I lost all the friends I had here again and again and again. So from one period to the next to my life, there's been nobody who knows me continuously. So I even just said now casually in passing, anyone who knows me knows I'm not the kind of guy to get into fistfights and go to jail, as Durianrider boasts he is. And again, whether or not we believe that, whether it's completely false or it's just exaggeration. But the sad thing is, there's nobody who really knows me anymore. Except, and this again, you can decide if this is positive or negative in your own life, because you're going to be in the situation soon. I said to my teacher here, my Chinese language teacher the other day, that by the end of this course, she will have spent more hours talking to me than any of my brothers or sisters. Any of them. Because you look at how many hours the course is. 5 days a week, 4 hours a day. I'm in class with her, right? So she's talking to me for 20 hours a week. So she will know me by the end of this course better than any of my blood relatives of this generation, brothers and sisters. And the same thing can happen with YouTube, right? There are people who've heard me talking on YouTube for more than 100 hours or whatever. Maybe that's a slight story. I have more than 300 videos. Some of them are an hour long, some of them are 50 more. So maybe it's not 100 hours. Sorry, but let's say more than 50 hours. They've heard me talking. So yeah. Whether it's positive or negative in your life, I think you'll see both as you keep going with this thing. But there will be people who meet you for the first time. Maybe it's at an animal rights conference or an ecological event or a Green Party event or something. There will be people who walk up to you and talk to you, but because they've watched every single one of your videos, they may know you better than your cousin or your friend you went to university with. The number of hours they've listened to you talk. So that's a very interesting dynamic, and that does travel with you, whether it's when you leave university or move from one city to the next in Canada.
That's who we want to be. We want to be people of substance. We want to be remembered by people. That's the vanity about that we don't like to discuss about us. That's the really ugly part in society, that we want to be something more than we actually are.